Now, this is a big story today. You would have heard it in your news bulletin. Something we wanted to discuss on the programme. Some of the UK's biggest police forces have said today that anti-Semitic offences rose dramatically in the weeks after the Hamas attacks on Israel on the 7th of October. I can't believe it was that long ago. 7th of October. Thankfully, this was not actually the story in Bedfordshire, where reports actually fell. Reports fell. I guess this doesn't necessarily mean incidents did. But in Hertfordshire in the Thames Valley area, they certainly did increase. There was also a rise in Islamophobic offences in some areas. Well, Jeremy Newmark is leader of Hertsmere Council, and I spoke to him for today's programme.
It's the chill factor, as some people have described it to me, that we're seeing on the part of the local Jewish community. It's a sense of increased vulnerability. It's a sense from kosher cafes and shop owners that their footfall has decreased because people potentially see their businesses as targets for attacks. And it's this sense of vulnerability and, as I say, this chill factor that's bedded in across our local Jewish communities over the past couple of months.
Well, it sounds appalling to experience that. I mean, I'm fortunate not to be from a group which experiences hatred in the street and online. So what is it like to be from a group that is targeted? What is the lived experience for people in Hertsmere? How does this threat, this chill factor, affect the way they lead their lives?
Well, in the days and first few weeks after the anti-Semitic massacre of October the 7th, we heard from Jewish institutions around the borough that people were simply stopping coming out, turning out to events, mother and baby events and toddler events in particular, which are normally buzzing and thriving in this centre of Jewish life here in Hertsmere. Suddenly, attendance is petered down to nearly nothing because people were quite literally afraid to come out of their doors and onto the streets. We've had additional security patrols being provided by the Community Security Trust, a fantastic charity that exists to provide security for communal events. And that has unfortunately very quickly become the reality of day-to-day life. Now, statistics in most recent days and weeks show that levels of incidents are perhaps starting, certainly in this area, to return to the baseline that was the case before October the 7th. But I think it's going to take a lot longer for this sense of vulnerability and this impact upon normative Jewish life in this area to reset itself.
Let's talk about the impact of social media, because before social media, the reality is if someone wanted to be hateful for whatever reason, they'd do it in private. They might do it down the pub. They might shout something at a football match. I guess they might shout something at someone in the street if they were obviously from a religious group. The social media has added a completely new element to this. Talk about how that's affected people's feelings of vulnerability.
Well, it certainly increases the chill factor, particularly amongst the younger generations. I mean, all of us are plugged into social media these days, but particularly the school children, students and so on. It's their life. It's their primary source of information as to what's going on in the world around them. And if that primary source becomes toxicified by some of the comments we've seen, either outrightly attacking Jews in this country or displaying their support for the anti-Semitic ideology of terror organizations like Hamas, this clearly has impact. And that's an impact that won't be reflected in the statistics that we talked about earlier, because most comments on social media don't get reported as anti-Semitic hate crimes. So it adds an additional layer of toxicity on top of the problem that's already there.
Let's talk about the other statistics we've seen, because it's not just the anti-Semitic hate crimes that we're talking about today. There have been a rise in Islamophobic hate crimes as well. And I just wonder whether there are still too many people in society who seem unable to distinguish between ordinary British Jews and ordinary British Muslims, and separately the actions of any given Israeli government or the actions of Hamas. They fail to separate those things.
I think that's absolutely right. And certainly, I've had incredibly valuable dialogue with the leaders of our small but growing Muslim community in our borough here in Hertsmere. And I know that they've experienced exactly this phenomena. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to make it very clear that ordinary Muslims, and for that matter, ordinary Palestinians, are not Hamas. If anything, for me, it adds another dimension to the damage that Hamas are doing. Obviously, there are horrific events that they're perpetuating out in the region itself, but they are effectively turning Muslim communities like our own in Hertsmere and elsewhere around the world into targets for this kind of hate crime.
Let me read you what the police have said about these statistics and I'll get your response. They say that they continue to work to better improve the investigation of hate crimes and the outcomes for victims. The force has specialist hate crime coordinators who assist investigating officers in identifying perpetrators, providing aftercare support for victims and working with communities to increase awareness of hate crime and reporting mechanisms. They also engage in joint working with partners such as local authorities, like indeed yours, victim support and third-party hate incident reporting centres. A fair amount of jargon in there. In a nutshell, are the police doing enough?
I think that it's hard to generalise. I would say that in recent years in Hertfordshire, there have been criticisms of the way in which Hertfordshire police, in particular, have dealt with anti-Semitic hate crime. However, we've seen massive improvements in that over the past 3 or 4 years, a much greater sensitivity and understanding to the way these crimes impact upon Jewish people and the wider Jewish community. Unfortunately, since October the 7th, we have certainly recognised a loss of confidence from the local Jewish community in the police around here, and that's primarily because of the perceived weakness of the Metropolitan Police in dealing with some of the outrageous incidents that have happened in the marches and protests in central London. People don't necessarily distinguish between our local county-based police force and the Met, and I think that loss of confidence has extended across the police in general. If you see it on the streets, call it out, because calling it out may not make any difference to the perpetrator, but it will certainly reassure those communities who are affected by these problems that the broader British public are with them.
That was Jeremy Newmark, leader of Hertsmere Council. I spoke to him for the show today and reflected